What is a story you know that you just can't quite explain? This isn't a story about me, but I think it still applies. In the 80s and 90s, my dad was touring in a Christian rock group. According to him, it was a wonderful, wild time. When I was a little girl, he would tell me stories of his touring days every night before I would go to sleep. He'd tell me about the massive concerts he'd do in the Philippines, with thousands of people in the audience, and about the time someone stole his shoes off of the stage on that very tour. He'd tell me the story about how he traded a Bible for a mandolin in Russia the week the Soviet Union collapsed. He'd regale me with the tale about how the president at the time signed a bill that got in the way of his tour in Alaska. All of these stories were wonderful in their own rights. He lived a rich life. But the story that always left me scratching my head was the one that ended it all. In the mid-1990s, my dad was interrupted halfway through his set with a phone call. His mother, Nellie, who had raised him, and his 3 siblings all on her own, had cancer. My dad, devastated that he may miss out on time with his mother, got in his beat-up Jeep and began a long, treacherous road trip across the country from the gig in California to her place in Atlanta. My dad drove deep into the night, until the next day, and a couple hours more, making it right in the middle of the Grand Canyon before he knew he needed to call it quits for the night. It was cloudy out and getting dark, and there wouldn't be anything to stop it for miles. He found a campsite a little down the gorge, and pitched up a tent. As soon as he had grabbed a quick meal of bugles and cheese whiz, he was off to sleep. He was awoken in the middle of the night by his tent blowing clean off of his head. Sometime in that fateful evening a storm had rolled in, and Marty, the bear of a man he is, slept right through it. So here he was, deep in the middle of nowhere, in a canyon, rain pouring down, and his car, a couple 100 feet up a cliff from him. The slopes were muddy and there was no way to call for help. He didn't have a cell phone or anything. Just a revolver his brother Ed had gifted him, a half-eaten packet of bugles, and of course, his Bible. My dad said he tried to climb on his own at first. The winds were blowing enough that each step was a concerted effort. The ordeal was compounded by the slick, muddy ground. He got a couple feet up before the ground slipped out beneath him and he tumbled down to where he started. The rain had begun to pick up at this point, pouring down the slope in larger quantities. My dad said he felt so hopeless right then. He couldn't do much else besides lean on the Lord. In that moment he prayed for protection from the Heavenly Father, the only father he ever had. He sat there for a while and waited for an answer to his call. But the rain didn't let up. Being stubborn, he continued to try to climb over and over again. Eventually, he got to the point where he could just barely see the outline of his Jeep up top through the pouring rain. Marty took a tentative first pull upwards, hoisting himself up, inch after inch, testing each precarious ledge. The rain poured down on his eyes. He must have been a terrible, bleeding, muddy sight, but he was never one for appearances, a fan of the old athletic shirt and cargo shorts combo. He pushed forwards, resolved that he would see his mother before she died. It wouldn't be fair for him to beat her to Heaven's Gate. The rain picked up. It was basically a river flowing over the side of the cliff. He pulled forward with all of his might, but he could feel his strength failing him. He neared the edge, when a rock fell down through the torrent and hit him straight on the forehead. Stunned, he lost his grip, his stomach sank as he could feel peril approaching him. But then, he swears, he saw a light. A bright yellow light, and felt something grip his hand. The force pulled him up, and off of the cliffside. When he got to the top, however, there was no one there. His car lay about 100 feet off the cliff, in the parking lot. Luckily, he was able to find his way back, and lay down in his car a bit. Now I don't know the aftermath of what took place that day. I'm not particularly spiritual or religious, but I know my father is. I don't know what he saw, maybe it was a kind stranger, head trauma, or just a fever dream, but what I do know is this. My father believes he was saved by a guardian angel that day. And because of that, he went on to be a minister.